It's the middle of September here in Charleston, and yes, it's still hot down here. This is Rick Jones, and you're listening to From the Bridge. This is actually the final official week of summer. For many states, September is the start of fall, but not down here. In fact, I think that September may just be the hottest month of the year. The University of South Carolina Gamecocks play their home games in Columbia, South Carolina in Williams-Brice Stadium. Lou Holtz was the coach at South Carolina for a number of years, and here's what he said about his stadium. He said, "It's not hell, but I can see it from here." I have to think that stadium is the hottest place on the planet. We went to a game a few years ago, an opening night, Thursday night game where South Carolina played North Carolina, and it was just hot and sticky and miserable, and then we had a lightning storm, and so they had to evacuate the stadium. We made a dash for our car. This was like maybe 2-3 minutes left in the third quarter. We made a dash to our car and literally got to our car before the bottom fell out and just poured and poured and poured. But rather than wait for the game to start back, we decided to head on back to Charleston. Well, the funny thing happened is we drove all the way back to Charleston, and by the time we got home, it was the time they were restarting the game. So we were able to watch the rest of the game on television in a little bit drier, a little bit cooler environment. So you all get my point. It's still very hot in the South. Speaking of hot, my special guest today is Bert Hensley, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the V Foundation for Cancer Research, and this charity remains hot in its pursuit of finding a cure for cancer. Bert will be here to tell us a lot about new programs for the V Foundation. We'll continue with part 2 of our series on the 7 C's of new business pitches, take another trip up on the Soapbox, and yes, another great place to eat, On the Road with Rick. Last week, we started our series on the 7 C's of new business pitches. We began with the first C, competency, and spent time talking about this first step and the need to establish yet another C word, credibility, by demonstrating both your expertise and your experience. The second C word is context. See, the truth is corporations don't really care about what you know or what you do or what you've done. They only care about what you can do for them, period. So it is critical, and yet that's another C word, that you understand how you can solve their specific problem or maximize their specific opportunity. They want to know that you have the tools and experience for them and not for someone else. When you present your expertise and your experience, be mindful that the persons or persons on the receiving end of your information is silently saying, "So what?" If your expertise and experience, your capabilities, yes, your competencies, don't resonate with their issues, then you will lose them right there and then. That's why context is so important. It shows you have done your homework and understand both their business in depth and also their issue or issues. Context begins with a deep dive into the prospect's business, their industry, their competitors, and things those competitors have done or are doing. How do you do this? Well, you can read their annual report. You can Google for some new articles about them and about their industry and even about their competitors. If you're answering an RFP, ask a whole lot of questions to make sure you understand what the problem or opportunity really is and not what you think it is. I'm going to give you an example. We answered a public RFP a few years ago, and that's really kind of the kiss of death because state institutions have to legally post an RFP so that anyone within the state or within the country can actually bid on the process. In most cases, if they haven't sent you directly the RFP, you're not even going to be in the consideration set. Well, in this case, my ego got the best of me. I read it and said, hey, we're perfect for this. Well, I'm going to go ahead and bury the lead. We didn't even get invited to the dance. But it's a great study in how we determine the context. You see, Ole Miss was looking for an agency to help them with a brand campaign. Well, that's too broad for me. Now, you were unable to ask questions physically, orally ask questions of the client. You had to submit them online. And maybe they didn't invite us to the dance because I wore them out with the dozens and dozens and dozens of questions that I asked them to try to find the real context of where their pain was really coming from. You know, when you talk about Ole Miss, you're talking about a very southern institution in the Southeastern Conference. They want a brand campaign. Well, what did that mean, and what did they really want? Well, after asking question after question after question, I finally got the right answer. You see, Ole Miss had 4 consecutive years of declining enrollment by their freshman class. That's the problem. They really didn't have a brand problem. They had an attendance problem. Now you got to go a little deeper. Why? Why were they having that? Well, number one, look at the birth rate in the state of Mississippi. It had declined significantly, so you had less of a pool of students in the state. And so your home flagship state university had less students that could potentially matriculate there. Secondly, you saw their rival Mississippi State begin to grow in attendance, largely because as a land-grant university, they were offering curriculum that often led directly to jobs. When you think about it, Ole Miss really is a liberal arts university versus Mississippi State that had, majors in things like engineering and business and other things. So you had that going on at the same time. Well, that was the context. So I understand what they needed to do. They really didn't need a brand campaign. I don't know who they hired. Maybe they did have a brand campaign. But what they really needed to do was solve their freshman decline in enrollment. We had a pretty interesting solution for them. Obviously, if you have a declining enrollment in your state, you're going to have to recruit students from out of state. And we specifically told them to only recruit students from 3 other states. You say 3 other states. What states could those be? Well, look, again, you're Ole Miss. You are a very southern institution. You're probably not going to be recruiting a whole lot of kids out of New Jersey. You're going to recruit other kids from the South. And so we focused on 3 states and only 3 states for them: Georgia, Tennessee, and South Carolina. Now, you may ask, why did you pick those states? We picked them because those 3 states have state lotteries. And those state lotteries have created scholarships for so many students that the best and brightest of the students in those states are not going to Duke. They're not going to Ivy League schools. Daddy's saying, you know what? If you go to South Carolina, I'll buy you a Jaguar and save money. And so the competition to get in the flagship state universities, the University of Georgia, the University of South Carolina, and yes, the University of Tennessee, are very, very competitive. And so you have great kids. In many cases, you have white males because of quota systems that may be the valedictorians of their classes not getting accepted to their state universities. So the pitch would have been, hey, I know you wanted to go to your state university, but we're an SEC school too. We'll be your second choice. Hotty toddy. And we think that was a pretty big idea. The bottom line is context is an essential part of the 7 C's. And we're not talking about the 7 C's of Sinbad fame. Next week, we'll tackle what most people fail to do, namely challenge conventional thinking. The V Foundation was created based on our word for the day, context. You had a former coach and ESPN personality who was literally dying of cancer. Jim Valvano wanted a cure, if not for him, for others. He understood that cures don't come from brochures or education or even treatments. They come from research. So he and his friends and colleagues at ESPN created a new type of charitable organization, one that would only fund research from the best minds and talents in the world. Research for all types of cancer and not just one. Research led by mavericks and non-traditional thinkers. No, we have not yet found a cure for cancer, but we have slowed it down and isolated it and kept many people alive through breakthrough treatments and medicines. The V Foundation is 100% vetted. What does that mean? That means they have enough money in their endowment to cover their annual overheads each and every year. So therefore, all monies raised go directly to fund research. And every day we are getting closer to finding a cure. My guest is on the front line to find new sponsors and revenue streams for the V Foundation and its fight against cancer. Let's welcome Bert Hensley to the bridge. Bert, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Rick.
So let's go back to the beginning. I always like to ask all our guests, where were you raised? Where'd you go to school? What was, your first job?
Yeah, so I was raised in Oxford, Ohio, college town, Miami of Ohio, just northwest of Cincinnati. And so great place to grow up, a good group of high school classmates and teammates. So youth sports all the way through high school, multiple sports were part of life for me. And it was a really rewarding place to grow up in terms of an aspiring, athlete, which is what I was. And growing up in the greater Cincinnati area, which is a great sports town, only kind of fueled that fire for me. So, I grew up in Oxford. Ironically, did not go to Miami, the hometown team, but instead went off to Ball State University, another Mid-American Conference school, on a baseball scholarship, and got a business degree in college while being a left-handed pitcher on the baseball team. So that was high school to college for me. Ended up staying in Indianapolis after college for a few years. My first job was with the Indianapolis Indians, the AAA baseball team in Indianapolis, who at the time were affiliated with my Cincinnati Reds. So that was a nice first job for me before coming out of college.
Well, you grew up in what I call the golden age of the Cincinnati Reds. I mean, Sparky Anderson had the definitive, wonderful, classic team.
The Big Red Machine.
That just had Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer. And those were the glory days of Cincinnati Reds baseball.
Absolutely. And I was actually grew up playing with and against the sons of the Big Red Machine. Folks like David Bell, Ken Griffey Jr., Pete Rose Jr., Eduardo Perez. Those guys were around the Cincinnati scene because of their dads, and it made for interesting teammates and opponents, to say the least. Actually, David Bell, who is now the manager of the Reds, was a third baseman on a Midland team that I played on, and we won the the World Series in national championship in 1988. And his father, Buddy, and grandfather, Gus, used to kind of sit quietly out along the right field foul line with my parents. So
that's very cool. That's very cool.
Interesting way to grow up, to say the least.
Well, and I think Ball State is one of the great little unsung classic universities. I have a friend, Jennifer Proud Mearns, whose husband Drew is the president there, and
yes.
And what a wonderful place to go to school. And you know, I always say those smaller Division I experiences are really kind of special from that standpoint. So after you left minor league baseball, what did you do after that?
Well, like a lot of young folks, kind of bounced around a little bit, did some work in the financial industry, but then in the sort of the mid to late 90s, ended up relocating down to the Research Triangle Park area of North Carolina, which would end up being a very important location in my life, in that. I got involved in a couple of different things that have actually stuck with me to this day. One of which was a very close friend of mine who I met in college. My college friends at Ball State were the high school friends of a big basketball star named Eric Montross, who came down and played at the University of North Carolina for Dean Smith. Eric and I became close friends in the fall of 1990, and to this day remain about as close as brothers, along with a few other guys in a group that are my closest friends in the world. So by living here in the Triangle, we were able to do some really fun things. We after his rookie year with the Celtics, we started a basketball camp to benefit the North Carolina Children's Hospital, and Coach Smith and Guthridge were very generous to offer the Smith Center to Eric to conduct that camp over Father's Day weekend. We thought we could do it for a few years when people still remembered who he was and cared about him, coming off of the halo effect of the 1993 National Championship. And little did we know that all these years later, we'd still have that camp going with a wait list that's years long, and have been able to make an impact, multi-million-dollar impact to build on to the North Carolina Children's Hospital through a little Father's Day weekend basketball camp. So quite a rewarding experience. But Chapel Hill and the Triangle, that became an important part of my life. And when I moved here, it kind of became a North Star for me to kind of come back to. So it's an important part of my life, and now for many different reasons related to my children being in school in North Carolina, and also the work that I do with the V Foundation, which is headquartered just down the road in Cary.
You know, I like the verse of scripture that talks about the mustard seed. You know, the mustard seed is the smallest seed, and yet it grows a big old bush that protected people. Y'all planted a very small seed way back then, thinking, hey, maybe it'll amount to something, and it has grown and it has flourished. And I think that is an amazing story. And it really does show that a few people collectively can get together and make a huge difference. We've talked a lot on our program about the V Foundation and about, you know, Jim's vision and the partnership with ESPN. And again, it was a very few people that made the decision that we were going to find a cure for cancer and try to do that. When did you first start working with the V Foundation?
Well, I started working with the foundation in 2018. It was late in the year. I'm coming off of a long run on the agency side of the business, where I had been doing work with sports and entertainment in the sports and entertainment field with brands who were using those industries and platforms to market their brand and grow business. And worked on the agency side with brands and companies, and we did a lot of work with nonprofit organizations, charitable groups that were activating in the sports and entertainment field. So the V Foundation was always a shining example of the way to do that, and that marriage between ESPN and the V Foundation, which I had been aware of since the beginning, having seen the inaugural ESPY awards and the formation of the V Foundation. But I was fortunate to come to work for the foundation as an employee in 2018. It's been a great 3-year run.
I was fortunate enough to be in the pit in 1983 when NC State upset Houston, and that great Houston team that everybody thought was invincible and undefeated. If you remember that year, probably the best team in the country, or maybe, well, Houston was, in my opinion, the best team in the country, but North Carolina had a freaking amazing team that year. They had won in 82, and so, Jordan's a sophomore, and Perkins and Worthy and Kenny Smith. They were a great team, and yet they got upset in the regional finals by the University of Georgia. And Georgia was a year after Dominique Wilkins had left. And so it was what we call the remains of that team. Hugh Durham had a team, Terry Fair and Vern Fleming. I mean, they were a very good basketball team, but in my opinion, they weren't in North Carolina's class. And if you remember, NC State had a mediocre year and literally had to win the ACC tournament even to qualify for the NCAA championship. Ran the table in the ACC tournament, beat Ralph Sampson, and got in the tournament. And then Jim kind of had a horseshoe up his butt, and nobody could make any free throws against him. He just kept fouling people. Nobody could make one. Well, they get to they get to the Final Four, and they play Georgia in the game, and everybody thinks the national championship game is that semifinal between a great Louisville team and Houston, and of course, Houston beats Louisville, NC State beats Georgia. Valvano says that they're not going to take a shot the whole game. They're going to hold the ball the whole game, and then shocks everybody by coming out and playing up tempo and playing great, and obviously win the game with Lorenzo Charles taking Derek Wittenberg's air ball, which Derek still says is a pass.
He's adamant. He's adamant about that.
Yes,
I'll tell you what.
Yeah, but the air ball that he dunks to win the national championship, and I was privileged to be there. I was a member of the National Association of Basketball Coaches. We had held our convention at the Final Four, and it was a great thing. So you had admired, as I think a lot of us had admired, Jim's speech, what they had done from that, and now you're in a great role to create, new initiatives, new strategic initiatives, new corporate partnerships, a bunch of stuff for the V Foundation. I think most of our listeners know about V Week, and they know about the Jimmy V Classic, both the men's and women's. They know about the ESPYs, and they may even know about the KL Fund. But there's a bunch of stuff that y'all are doing right now I think our listeners don't know about. Let's start with this initiative that you've got in honor of ESPN legend and North Carolina graduate Stuart Scott. Talk a little bit about that program. Yeah,
so Stuart had long been a supporter of the V Foundation, like so many of his colleagues at ESPN, and so when he started his courageous battle with cancer, he was able to use that platform, kind of put your money where your mouth is approach. And so very important to him was the idea that there existed a disparities gap between among, Black and African American and minority populations in the cancer space. And so some of the biological disparities, but also, some of those socioeconomic factors and cultural factors that went into that. And so it was important for him to shine a light on that issue. And so in 2015, after his passing, along with ESPN, we formed the Stuart Scott Memorial Cancer Research Fund to do just that. And so that fund really has a threefold approach to it. Obviously, we address the disparities gap in cancer by funding research into that, but we also look to bring researchers of color into the field. So we're expanding our work we're doing in the HBCU community to bring researchers of color into the field. And then the third thing we do is to fund programs that expand clinical trial enrollment among minority communities. And so the fund has been very impactful. We have made $12.7 million in investments into that through 41 research grants at 24 institutions around the United States. And so we're very proud of the work that we've done in Stuart's name since 2015, and have a lot of big things coming down the pike with that in terms of elevating it, the reach across the country. But we have some exciting things happening right here in our home state of North Carolina around that, where we will amplify work we're doing with UNC and Duke and some corporate partners. But it's a great fund, and it's highly impactful in the work that we've been able to invest in by very, very smart people all over the country focused on that minority disparities gap.
Well, in a year of, the tragedy of George Floyd that has led to the Black Lives Matter movement, to the idea that so many corporations are looking to support, meaningful initiatives aimed at both the African-American community and other underserved communities, I think you are a great place for corporations to think about doing something that literally can save lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. We've seen a lot more attention, either through the social justice movement, some of the things that the sports world have really stepped up to shine a light on. Companies making dedicated corporate social responsibility initiatives in that area, but also, I think the COVID-19 pandemic also shined a light on broader healthcare disparities that exist among minority populations. So you take that paired with the high-profile social justice movement. I really do think we're at an inflection point here in the United States, and companies and individuals are lining up to do something about that. And we feel like the Stuart Scott Memorial Cancer Research Fund could be a great vehicle for that inside the cancer space. And we're also working on some next generation initiatives around that fund that hopefully we'll be able to unveil in the coming months. So we may have to do this again, a follow-on.
Absolutely, we'll do that. Now, you live in Nashville, and obviously we do a lot of work in Nashville in the country music space. My partner, Ron Cook, lives in Franklin. You're doing some interesting things with my buddy Scott Ramsey with the National Sports Commission. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that I was on the agency side of the business, and so in a previous life before joining the V Foundation, they were a client of mine and got heavily involved in some of the bigger events there, the Music City Bowl, and also some stuff around the SEC basketball tournament and some of the things that intersect at sports and entertainment, which is, I think there's no better example of that intersection in the country than Nashville. I mean, it's a legit, sports town that is well known globally for its role as a music destination. But yeah, so I took that existing relationship and brought it with me to the V Foundation, and so we have collaborated with Scott and his team, both at the Sports Council and specifically the Music City Bowl, to become the national charity partner of the game and of essentially the year-round initiatives of the Sports Council. I think we both felt like it was a natural fit given the mutual partner we had in ESPN, the work that we do together with them. And then as the Music City Bowl was evolving, one of the great V Foundation corporate partners, TransPerfect, signed on to be the title sponsor of the Music City Bowl, and not only added to the mix of opportunities for us to infuse the mission of the V Foundation into a really great property. The Music City Bowl is, I'd say it sits just outside the New Year's Six. It's always very highly attended as a live event. It rates well on ESPN, and 2 years ago, became an exclusive SEC Big Ten property. And when those two conferences come together, they both travel well. So a lot of fertile ground for us to cultivate new and exciting programming around the college football space, using the Music City Bowl, the TransPerfect Music City Bowl, as a great jumping off point for that.
Well, we like to remind everybody, all God's children like to come to Nashville. I mean, you're a sporting fan, you're going to go. Well, Mama wants to go too. I mean, everybody likes to come to Music City, and the job that y'all have done there with the Music City Bowl and other things is just tremendous. And I think and Nashville's kind of becoming what I call an influencer town. That there's a lot of personalities and things going on that you can kind of test programs and then say, hey, this works. We can roll it out to other cities. Tell me about some of the other kind of initiatives that you're working on these days.
Well, the one that I'm especially excited about is really more of a partner platform, and it will allow us to activate in a number of ways across, in a number of locations. But we have worked with our agency, Social Capital Partnerships, to develop a platform around the concept One Team for Victory Over Cancer. And that ties in, to the notion of our tagline, which is Victory Over Cancer. And the idea that when one or more partners come together with the V Foundation, there's a great opportunity for us to elevate the work we're doing along the lines of that vision of achieving victory over cancer. But specifically, it gives us the kind of the umbrella platform around some resources and toolkits, and we're bringing partners together that have media inventory and marketing budgets that they're willing to contribute to this partnership, along with the V Foundation, kind of for the first time really making a dedicated outward marketing and media spend to develop assets around our brand. So One Team for Victory Over Cancer as the umbrella, then you drop down from that, and there's golf for victory over cancer, cycling for victory over cancer, running for victory over cancer. So any number of activities that individuals or companies could, adopt as a vehicle to support the V Foundation. And so we're really excited about that. We've got a number of our very high profile anchor brands, from ESPN to Bristol Myers Squibb, Constellation Brands, and which is the beer and wine and spirits company, and their brands activating behind us, the WWE, and then Capital One and a few others who we're working with to define what that platform can look like and create an opportunity for companies to come together with the V Foundation and our media partners to help us advance toward that vision of achieving victory over cancer.
Well, I don't know of another disease that has touched so many lives. I mean, cancer has has become part of everybody's family, it seems like, in some capacity. And what I love about the V Foundation is you don't limit yourself to one form of cancer or another. You're looking at all forms of cancer. And the other thing I love, and I like to remind our listeners all the time, when you give $1 to the V Foundation, that dollar went to research grants. You're 100% vested, where you've got your administrative overheads covered. And I've liked the fact that y'all traditionally, with your doctors and your boards, have set out and found some, what I call, some rebel researchers, some people that maybe weren't big tenured people, but said, hey, I have a unique idea I'd like to try. And y'all have said, hey, we've got the resources to help you make that. And from that, a lot of breakthroughs have come through. Tell everybody a little bit about the process of how y'all do your grants.
Sure. So you mentioned, we have a scientific advisory committee, and quite frankly, that's in many ways the hidden gem of the V Foundation. Over the 28 years of our existence, we've been able to attract volunteer leadership from the absolute top cancer research institutions around the country, who volunteer to be part of our board of directors and our scientific advisory committee. And they vet, applications for, let me back up. We actually, most of our requests for application for grants are distributed to among the 75 or so National Cancer Institute designated centers around the country. So essentially the cream of the crop. We send out a request for application. They do kind of an internal competition, if you will, applying for one of two grant types that make up the bulk of our grants. One is those, what you just mentioned, kind of those early career investigators. We call them V Scholars. And that actually stems right back to Jim's treatment after he relocated his treatment from Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York to Duke. He observed the people who were, working feverishly to try to understand his cancer and save or lengthen his life. And what he found was that some of those young, fresh minds brought some of the most out of the box approaches to the table. And so he thought it was very important that we continue to fund that kind of work. So those early career scientists in the we call them V Scholars, have been an integral part of the work we've done, and in many ways probably the legacy of the V Foundation, because we essentially are the first money that some of these professionals receive in their career in launching their labs, and they have, many of whom have gone on to wildly successful and impactful careers in cancer research. The other type of grants that we tend to fund are called translational grants, and those are the ones that are bringing therapies and treatment from the bench to the bedside. And in many cases, those grants are $600,000 grants over 3 years. And oftentimes that's the last money that a researcher receives on the private side before unlocking, large federal money. So oftentimes we're kind of at key points of the cancer research spectrum is where we're delivering our grants. But going before the pandemic, we had kind of gotten up to right around just under the $30 million a year mark in terms of the grants that we were funding. We're able to stay, not only afloat but really thrive throughout the pandemic, funding impactful work, and we're back on a really great run rate to be able to continue to fund grants among those two lines, the V Scholars and the translational grants. We also do some designated grant work, and but by and large, most of what we fund are through those two grant vehicles.
Well, that's where we're going to leave it for today. I am going to bring you back soon to talk about some of these other initiatives because you've got so many neat things in play that you're not ready to publicize yet, but we'll be here. Bert, you're doing what I call good work in God's work. The work of the V Foundation, the work that you're personally doing, it matters. It matters a great deal, and I can't thank you enough for being with us today from the bridge.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Let's climb back up on the old soapbox. I like seasons. Fall is my very favorite season of the year. In fact, October in Charleston, to me, is the very best month of the year. Football should be enjoyed in the fall. Again, I like seasons. When I was a young man, there was a hit song by the music group The Byrds called Turn, Turn, Turn. It's actually a song that was written in the 1950s by the great folk singer Pete Seeger. It's based on scripture from the book of Ecclesiastes in the King James Version of the Bible. The song reminds us that to everything, turn, 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 there is a season, turn, 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 and a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep. Time is the one thing we cannot make any more of. Time is precious, but we can determine what we do with our time. Now, I'm a fanatic about time and time management. I'm a squeezer of time. I'm organized, I'm purposeful, I'm intentional. I'm trying to make a difference. Norman Vincent Peale once told a story about a boy on the beach. Little boy was walking on the beach, and 1,000 starfish had washed up on the beach. And as he walked down the beach, he would pick one up and throw them back into the water to save it. Well, a man watched him for a few minutes and then came over to the boy and said, "Son, there are thousands of starfish on this beach. You can't possibly be making a difference." The little boy smiled, picked up one, threw it in the water, and said, "Well, I made a difference to that one." You know, I'm trying to be like that little boy on the beach. I'm trying to make my time matter. Bert Hensley is making his time matter. The question of the day is, what are you doing with your time? And does it matter? That's my view from the soapbox. Let's close with another terrific place to eat on the road with Rick. The V Foundation is based in Cary, North Carolina, near Raleigh. In downtown Raleigh on McDowell Street, there's this fabulous place to eat called Poole's Diner. It actually began when John Poole started a pie shop there in 1945. It didn't take long for people to ask for things more than pie, and so he expanded and formed what we used to call a luncheonette. The tagline of his luncheonette and his pie shop was, "Life is short, eat dessert first." Years later, I had the chance to work for another Raleigh native, Kay Yao, who was the coach at NC State. Kay had cancer, and she would often say, when you have cancer, you should always eat dessert first. In fact, at one point, we did some interesting fundraising luncheons to raise money for the Kay Yao Fund, where we served dessert first and then salads. Well, this restaurant was closed and then was reborn a few years ago by Chef Ashley Christensen. Their tagline today is a modern diner with reimagined comfort food. They have a daily chalkboard menu, seasonal foods from local farms, I can't tell you what to eat because I don't know what they're going to be serving, but I know every day they serve macaroni au gratin. It's the best mac and cheese I have ever eaten anywhere. Right now, they're back open during this COVID season with limited seating. Reservations are a must. It's Pools in Raleigh, a must dining destination on the road with Rick. That's it from the waters of the Bohicket River today from the bridge. We hope you'll join us again next week. This is the captain signing off.